I closed 4,000 of these deals, Garrett. Did you really think I wouldn't know exactly what you pulled?
This is insane. She's confused, she's not well and tamed. This is a setup.
The pen was already in my son's hand when I pushed my walker through that door. Garrett looked up, and the color drained right out of his face. "Mom," he said, "you're supposed to be in rehab." I looked at this man about to sign my house over to a stranger, and I said, "Garrett, I closed 4,000 of these deals. Did you really think I wouldn't know exactly what you pulled?" Then the detective laid his badge down on the table, real quiet, and the whole room went still. "My name is Maeve Ridgway. I'm 73 years old, and for 31 years, I made sure other folks' home sales were honest. I never once thought I'd have to stop my own children from stealing mine. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. I bought the house on Larkspur Lane with my husband Jerry, back when the street still had dirt shoulders and the trees were no taller than I was. Folsom was a quiet little town then, the kind of place where you knew the names of everybody's dogs. We paid $41,000 for that house in 1981, and Jerry damn near had a heart attack signing the papers. He thought we'd lost our minds spending that kind of money. 45 years later, it's worth close to $700,000, and there isn't a dime owed on it. We paid that mortgage off the hard way, a little at a time, skipping vacations, driving our cars till the wheels about fell off, eating a whole lot of beans so the kids could have shoes that fit. Jerry passed in the spring of 2022. Almost 50 years we were married, give or take. He built the front porch on that house with his own two hands, every board, every nail, one long summer when Reed was still in diapers. I still take my coffee out there every single morning. I sit in the chair he made, and I talk to him like he's going to answer me back. Some mornings. Honest to God, I swear he does. For 31 years, I worked as an escrow officer. If you don't know what that is, I'll tell you plain. It's the person who sits dead in the middle of a home sale and makes sure nobody gets robbed. Money comes in, paperwork goes out, signatures get checked, titles get cleared, and at the end of it all, somebody hands over the keys and it's done, clean and legal and above board. I closed something like 4,000 of those deals before I hung it up. And in 31 years, Lord, I have seen every dirty trick in the book. Forged signatures, fake powers of attorney, grown sons trying to sell their mama's house right out from under her while she's 6 feet under and not even cold yet. I used to come home and tell Jerry, the things people will do to their own blood, you would not believe it. I had no earthly idea I'd live long enough to see it land on my own doorstep. I raised 3 children in that house. Garrett's the oldest, 47 now. Smart as a whip, charming. That boy could talk a dog right off a meat truck. He went into construction, then real estate, flipping houses, building little developments out past the highway. For a while there, he was doing real good, driving a big shiny truck, flying the family to Hawaii. Then the market turned, a couple of his projects went belly up, and last year his whole company folded. He never said much about it to me, but I'm not blind and I'm not stupid. I knew my boy was drowning. After Jerry died, Garrett took over handling all my paperwork. My bills, my bank statements, the property tax, the whole 9 yards. He said, "Mom, you've got enough on your plate. Let me deal with the boring stuff." And God help me, I let him. I thought it was kindness. I thought my son was looking after his widowed mother. Then there's Corinne, my middle child, 45, a middle school teacher, just about the sweetest girl you ever met. Her husband, Doug, got himself laid off a few months back, and I knew things were tight in that house. Real tight. But Corinne was the one who called me every Sunday like clockwork. She remembered my doctor appointments. She'd show up with a pot of soup the second I sniffled. If you'd have asked me to bet my life on which of my children would never in 100 years hurt me, I'd have put every last chip I owned on Corinne. No two ways about it. And then there's my baby Reed. 40 years old, lives way out in Denver, works as a paramedic. He's not rich, Lord knows. He scrapes by like the rest of us, pulling double shifts and renting some little apartment. But that boy has a heart the size of Montana. He calls me twice a week just to hear my voice, and he means it. It happened on a Tuesday morning this past March. I was carrying a basket of laundry down the back steps, same as I'd done 10,000 times, and my foot caught the bottom stair. I went down hard. I heard the crack before I even felt it. Broke my hip clean in two. I laid there on that cold concrete for I don't know how long, hollering until the mailman finally heard me and called 911. They put a pin and a plate in my hip and told me I'd be stuck in a rehab facility about 6 weeks getting back on my feet. 6 weeks. At 73, with a busted hip, you do not bounce back the way you used to. I was staring down a long, slow haul of physical therapy and lousy cafeteria food and learning how to walk all over again with one of those ugly metal walkers. Garrett and Corinne came to the hospital. They sat right by my bed and held my hands and told me not to worry about a thing. Garrett said, "Moms, you just focus on getting strong. Corinne and I will take care of the house. We've got the keys. We'll water your plants, bring in your mail, keep an eye on the whole place. You don't lift a finger." I remember squeezing his hand and feeling so grateful I could have bawled right there. My kids taking care of their old mother. Isn't that the whole reason you raised them? Reed called from Denver that same night, frantic, asking if he ought to fly out. I told him, "No, baby, I'm fine. It's just a broken hip. Your brother and sister have it handled." He didn't sound so sure. He said, "Mom, you call me if anything feels off, you hear me? Anything at all." I laughed him off. I said, "What on earth could feel off? I'm laid up in a hospital bed, eating Jell-O." That's how it started. Me, flat on my back, handing my children the keys to everything I owned in this world, and never once dreaming about what they'd already set in motion. It was about 10 days into my stay at the rehab place when the phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up because I was tired and sore, and the physical therapist had worked me half to death that morning. But the name on the screen stopped me cold. It said Roxanne Tillman. Now I've got to tell you about Roxanne. 25 years ago, she walked into Sutter Pioneer Title as a nervous young thing, green as spring grass, and I took her under my wing. I trained that girl, taught her everything I knew about escrow, about reading people, about trusting your gut the second a deal starts to stink. She's 56 now, and she runs that whole office, senior escrow officer, sharp as a tack. We don't talk as much as we used to, but she's family in every way that counts. So when I saw her name pop up, I figured she was just calling to check on me. Somebody must have told her about my hip. I answered and I said, "Roxanne, honey, to what do I owe the pleasure?" There was a pause, and then she said, "Real careful, Maeve. Are you sitting down?" Said, "Roxanne, I'm lying down. I broke my hip. Where on earth have you been?" She said, "Maeve, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Are you selling your house?" I thought for sure I'd misheard her. I said, "Am I what?" She said it again, slower this time. "Are you selling the foos on Larkspur Lane?" My stomach did something funny. I said, "Roxanne, I am sitting in a rehab center learning to walk with a walker. I am not selling a damn thing. Why in the world would you even ask me that?" And that's when she told me. She said a file had crossed her desk that very morning. A cash sale. My address, 1144 Larkspur Lane. And here's the part that turned my blood to ice water. The seller on that paperwork wasn't me. It was Garrett. There was a grant deed already signed, already recorded down at the county, dated last week, transferring my house clean out of my name and into my son's. As far as the county of Sacramento was concerned, Garrett owned my home, and he was selling it off to some cash buyer, a fella named Dale Hutchins, for $560,000. I need you to understand what that number meant to me. My house is worth $700,000, easy. Anybody who's ever pulled comps in that neighborhood knows it. 560 was a fire sale price, the kind of number you slap on a thing when you don't give a damn what it's actually worth. You just want it gone, fast and quiet, before anybody starts asking questions. And the closing, Roxanne said, was set for 10 days out. I couldn't pull in any air. The whole room sort of tilted sideways. I'd spent 31 years on the other end of these calls. I'd been the one delivering the bad news to some poor blindsided soul, and now here I was on the receiving end of the worst news of my entire life, and the name stamped all over it belonged to my own flesh and blood. I said, Roxanne, that's not possible. I never signed a deed. I never signed anything. And she said, I know, Maeve. I know you didn't. That's exactly why I'm calling you, instead of just running the file through. Because the second I saw your name on that deed, something in my gut went sideways. The signature looked wrong to me. The whole thing looked wrong. 25 years of you drilling it into my head. Trust your gut. Trust your gut. So I trusted it and I pulled the file before it could go 1 inch further. Then she told me something I didn't fully understand until a whole lot later. Something I just tucked away in the back of my mind, she said. And I'll be honest with you, Maeve, I might not have caught it half as fast as I did, except somebody called the office. Anonymous. Wouldn't leave a name. Just said there was something not right about a sale on Larkspur Lane, and somebody ought to take a real close look at that paperwork before it closed. And then they hung up. I figured it was a crank at first, but it nagged at me enough to go digging, and then I saw whose house it was. At the time, I swear, I didn't think twice about that phone call. I had bigger things crashing down on top of my head. But you hold on to that, because it's going to matter more than you can possibly imagine. I sat there in that little rehab room with the phone shaking against my ear, and I started doing the math the way only somebody who's done this for a living can do it. The deed was forged, that was plain as day. Garrett had somehow signed my name, gotten the thing notarized, and recorded it down at the county. He'd priced the house dirt cheap to a cash buyer so it would close fast before I ever made it home. Cash deals. They don't need a bank, don't need an appraisal, don't need weeks of underwriting hanging them up. They can close in a matter of days. By the time I came hobbling home on my brand new hip, the house would already belong to a total stranger. My whole life sold off for a fraction of what it was worth, and the money, every last nickel of it, sitting pretty in Garrett's pocket. He'd planned the whole thing around my hip. That's what kept hitting me, over and over, like a fist to the chest. He didn't just take advantage of me being laid up. He had timed it, dead on, to the one stretch of weeks when I'd be too broke down and too far away to notice a thing. My own son had looked at his mother's shattered hip and seen himself an opportunity. Roxanne's voice came back through the phone. Maeve, she said. Maeve, are you still there? Talk to me. I said, I'm here. And then I got out the only thing I could. I said, both of them, or just Garrett. Is my daughter in this too? She went quiet. She said she didn't know for sure yet. The paperwork only had Garrett's name on the sale. But she'd seen enough of these in her day to know that this kind of thing, it's hardly ever just one person. I told her not to do a single thing yet. Don't flag the file, don't cancel it, don't tip anybody off. I needed to think. She said, Maeve, this is fraud, you know that. This is a crime. You have got to get the police involved. And I said, I know exactly what it is, Roxanne. I spent 3 decades watching people do this very thing to each other. I just never in my life thought I'd be on the wrong end of it, and I sure as hell never thought it'd be my own babies holding the knife. We hung up, and I sat there in the dark, in that ugly little room that smelled like disinfectant and somebody else's supper, a metal walker parked by the bed, and a phone full of sweet, loving text messages from the very same children who were fixing to rob me blind. And somewhere down underneath all that heartbreak, something else started to wake up. Something harder. 31 years I'd spent protecting strangers from this exact nightmare. I knew the paperwork. I knew the players. I knew every single step of how a sale like this goes through, which meant I knew every single step of how to blow it apart. They thought I was just a broken old woman in a rehab bed who'd never see it coming. Lord, did they have the wrong idea about who they were dealing with? I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just laid there watching the ceiling tiles, listening to some poor soul down the hall calling out for a nurse. And by the time the sun came through those cheap blinds, I had myself a plan, or at least the front end of one. First thing I did was call Lorraine Maddox. Lorraine's been my attorney going on 20 years now. She handled Jerry's estate when he passed, drew up my will, the whole works. She's the kind of lawyer who tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, which is exactly the kind you want when the roof's caving in. I caught her right as she got into the office, and I said, Lorraine, I need you to pull every document you've got with my name on it. and I need you to tell me one thing straight. Did I ever at any point sign a power of attorney giving Garrett the right to handle my property? She didn't even have to look. She said, Maeve, no, absolutely not. We talked about this years ago, and you told me flat out you didn't want one. You said when the time came, you'd set it up with all three kids together, not before. There's nothing. No POA, no transfer, no nothing. Your house is yours, free and clear, no liens, no disputes, last I knew. So I told her. I told her everything Roxanne had told me, the deed, the forged signature, the cash buyer, the fire sale price, the closing 10 days out. And for a second, the line just went dead quiet. Then Lorraine said, in this real low voice, Maeve, do you understand what this is? This is not a family squabble. Recording a forged deed down at the county, that's a felony. It's got a number and everything, Penal Code 115. Forging your signature is its own charge. And doing it to a 73-year-old, that drags in elder financial abuse on top, which in this state is a whole other can of worms. Your son could be looking at real prison time. You need the police today. I said, I know, I'm getting there. But Lorraine, I want it done right. I spent 31 years watching these cases fall apart because somebody moved too fast or tipped their hand. I want it airtight. She said she'd start pulling records and have everything ready for me. And then she said the thing I'll never forget. She said, Maeve, I'm so sorry. No mother should ever have to make this phone call. I had to hang up before I lost it completely. Now here's where my stomach started doing flips, because there was one question I'd been circling all night like a buzzard, and I couldn't put it off any longer. Was it just Garrett, or was my Corinne in it too? I called Roxanne back and I asked her to do me a favor. Said that escrow file, pull up everybody attached to it, every name, every email, every phone number, the whole contact list. She went quiet for a minute, clicking through, and then she got still on the other end. She said, Maeve, there's a secondary contact on this file. Emails going back and forth, setting up the closing, coordinating with the buyer's people. And it's not Garrett. It's a Corinne Lowry. That's your daughter, isn't it? I felt it like a hand closing around my throat. Lowery, Corinne's married name, my girl's Sunday phone call, my pot of soup, the one child on God's green earth I would have staked my life on. Her name right there in black and white, helping move my house out from under me. But I'm a stubborn old woman, and I wasn't ready to believe it on paper alone. So I did something that just about broke me. I called my daughter. She picked up on the second ring, all sunshine. Mama, she said, how are you feeling? How's the therapy going? And I made my voice as light as I could. And I said, oh, sore as the dickens, but they say I'm doing real good. How's everything at the house? And listen to me. I held the phone so tight, my knuckles went white, because I just knew if she lied to me, I'd hear it. And she lied. Smooth as silk. She said, oh, Mama, don't you worry about a thing. The house is just fine. I watered all your African violets, brought the mail in. The place is locked up tight. You just focus on you. And then, and this is the part that told me everything, she said, you know, Mama, when you're back on your feet, maybe we ought to sit down and talk about whether that big old house is too much for you now. Something smaller, easier, someplace you wouldn't have to climb all those stairs. There it was, the setup, planting the seeds so that when I came home to find my house gone, she could pat my hand and tell me it was for my own good, that I never could have managed those stairs anyway. It was rehearsed. I'd heard a lot of liars in 31 years, and I knew the sound of words that had been practiced in a mirror. I said, that sounds nice, sweetheart. We'll talk about it. And I hung up and I sat there on the edge of that hospital bed with my busted hip, and I cried like I hadn't cried since Gedry's funeral. Not because they were taking the house, because they were both in it, both my babies, the two of them sitting around somewhere planning how to rob their mother and then dress it up like a kindness. That was the moment something in me changed for good. I stopped being a heartbroken old woman, and I started being the escrow officer who'd seen this exact play run 100 times. And I made up my mind. I was not going to call them up and confront them. I was not going to give them a chance to lawyer up and cook a story and slither out of it. No, I was going to let them walk right up to that closing table thinking they'd won, and then I was going to be standing there when they did. I wanted to look them dead in the eye I wanted them caught so cold and so clean that not a soul in any courtroom could ever call it a misunderstanding. To pull that off, I had to get out of that rehab center. So I checked myself out nearly a month early against doctor's orders and the head nurse pitching a fit. She told me I was being reckless, that I could re-injure the hip, and I told her, honey, somebody is stealing my house, and a busted hip is the least of my problems right now. I signed the papers and I clomped out of there on my walker. I didn't go home, though. That was the smart play. If I went home, the neighbors might mention it, and word might get back to the kids that Mama was out early, and the whole thing would blow up before I was ready. So I called Pearl. Pearl Easton's been my best friend for going on 40 years. We met when our kids were little, and she's buried a husband too, so she knows. I called her and I said, Pearl, I need a place to stay for a couple weeks, and I need you not to ask me 100 questions just yet. There was about 1 second of silence, and then she said, what did those kids do? That's the thing about a real friend. They already know. I said I'd tell her everything when she came and got me, and she said she'd be there in 40 minutes, and she was there in 30. Pearl set me up in her spare room, fussing over me, propping pillows under my hip, and over a pot of coffee I told her the whole sorry story. She just shook her head and said the same thing I kept thinking. She said, Maeve, what in God's name do they need the money for that bad? And that right there was the question that cracked the whole thing wide open. Because the next morning, I started doing what I do best. I started pulling records. Old habits die hard, and even retired, I still knew how to pull a property profile, how to read a title, how to dig into the public record. Lorraine had her people pulling the official documents, but I went poking around myself, the way only somebody who'd lived inside these systems for 3 decades could. And I want you to understand, when you've done a thing for 31 years, you don't just read a document. You feel when something's off, the way a piano tuner hears a flat note nobody else can. So I pulled the title history on 1144 Larkspur Lane. And the forged deed was there, sure enough, just last week, Garrett's little masterpiece. But then my eye caught something else. Something further down, something older. There was a lien on my house. A home equity line of credit, a HELOC. Recorded 8 months ago, I sat there and I stared at that screen until the letters went blurry. 8 months. My house that we'd paid off with blood and beans and 40 years of going without, my house that didn't owe a dime to a living soul, had a home equity line drawn against it. A big one, and I had never, not in 10,000 years, signed for it. I'd never even heard of it. And then it all came together, and I felt sick to my stomach in a way I can't even put words to. Garrett. Garrett, who, after his daddy died, had so generously offered to handle all my paperwork, my bills, my bank statements, my mail, the whole 9 yards. I'd handed him the keys to my entire financial life and called it love. And somewhere in there, 8 months back, when his company was going under and the bills were stacking up, my son had forged my signature on a home equity line of credit against my house, and he'd been quietly bleeding money out of it ever since. Drip, drip, drip for the better part of a year, tens of thousands of dollars. And I never saw a single statement because he was the one collecting my mail. The house sale wasn't the beginning of this thing. It was the end of it. It was Garrett scrambling, desperate, because that HELOC was racking up payments he couldn't make and questions he couldn't answer. And sooner or later, somebody, the bank, the county, somebody was going to come knocking. So he had to make the whole house disappear, fast for cash, and pocket enough to cover his tracks before his mother ever found out a HELOC even existed. My broken hip didn't start his scheme. It just handed him the window to finish it. I called Lorraine and told her about the HELOC, and she went quiet. Then she said, Maeve, this isn't a one-time thing. This is a pattern. This has been going on for the better part of a year. This makes it so much worse for him. And I said, I know it does. And God help me. Even hating him the way I did right then, some little piece of my heart still cracked for my boy, because I thought, how scared and how lost do you have to be to do this to your own mother? But scared doesn't make it right. Drowning doesn't give you the right to pull somebody else under to save yourself. It was time to bring in the police. Lorraine knew a detective over in the financial crimes unit, fella named Ray Coletti. worked a lot of elder abuse cases. She set up a meeting, and Pearl drove me down to the station, walker and all. And I'll be honest with you, that first meeting did not go the way I'd hoped. Detective Coletti was maybe 50, tired looking, the kind of man who's seen too much and slept too little. He listened to me, polite enough, but I could see it in his face, that look I knew so well from the other side. He said, "Mrs. Ridgway, I want to make sure I understand. Your son's handling your affairs while you're laid up, and you're worried he might be overstepping. Are you sure this isn't a situation where the family's trying to help and maybe got ahead of themselves? Sometimes these things look worse than they are. And here's where 31 years paid off, because I didn't get flustered and I didn't get weepy. I laid it out for him cold and clean, like I was walking a buyer through a complicated closing. I said, "Detective, let me make this simple for you. There is a grant deed recorded with Sacramento County dated last week, transferring my home out of my name and into my son's, bearing a signature I did not make. That's a forged instrument, recorded, which is a violation of Penal Code 115. There is a cash sale scheduled to close in 8 days, selling my $700,000 home for $560, which any appraiser will tell you is a fire sale price designed for a quick, quiet exit. And there is a home equity line of credit recorded against my property 8 months ago, also bearing a signature I did not make, which my son has been drawing down on while controlling my mail so I'd never see a statement. I spent 31 years as an escrow officer. I am not confused. I am not exaggerating. My children are robbing me, and I can prove every word of it." I watched his whole face change. He sat up a little straighter. He pulled a legal pad over, and he said, "Real different now. Okay, Mrs. Ridgway. Tell me about the closing." We talked for 2 hours. I had Roxanne email over her statement in the file. I had Lorraine's record of my actual estate documents. By the time I rolled out of there on my walker, Detective Ray Coletti was on my side, and we had ourselves the bones of a plan. And here's where it got delicate, because this is the part where most folks would have messed it up. The easy thing, the safe thing, would have been to file what we call a lis pendens, a notice of pending legal action, which clouds the title so the house can't be sold to anybody, and to ring up the title company and formally kill the deal. Done. House saved. But here's the problem with that. The second Garrett got wind that the deal was dead and the title was flagged, he'd know. He'd know I knew. And a cornered man does one of two things. He runs or he starts shredding evidence and cooking up a story. And worst of all, I'd never get to prove what was really in his heart. He'd just say it was all a big mix-up, that he was trying to help his poor mother, and with a slick lawyer he might even walk. No, I wanted intent. I wanted it on the record in front of witnesses, that my children knew exactly what they were doing. And for that, I needed them to show up to that closing, so we built it careful. Roxanne, as the senior escrow officer, quietly put the file on what we call a hold pending verification. That's a routine thing, happens all the time. Escrow needs to confirm some detail before funds move. From the inside, it meant the deal could not actually close. No money would ever change hands. No deed would record. The house was safe, locked down tight. But from the outside, from where Garrett sat, it just looked like a little paperwork delay. Nothing to spook him. The signing appointment would go forward. Everybody'd come sit down at the table like it was all happening, and they'd never know. The floor had already dropped out from under them. Lorraine had the quiet title action, all drawn up and ready to file, the legal move that would officially void that forged deed and wipe it off the books. But we wouldn't pull the trigger on it until the moment came, so as not to tip our hand. And Detective Coletti, he agreed to be there at the signing. In the room, plain clothes, waiting. The closing was set for the following Friday at 2:00 at Sutter Pioneer Title, the same office where I'd spent 31 years of my life, making sure nobody ever got robbed. The waiting was the hardest part. 8 days of it. 8 days of playing along, texting my kids sweet little nothings about my therapy, telling Corinne her violets sounded lovely, telling Garrett what a comfort it was, knowing he had everything handled. 8 days of smiling into the phone while my heart turned to stone. There was a bad moment midweek when Garrett texted Roxanne's office, antsy, pushing, asking why the closing hadn't funded yet, whether there was a problem, could they speed it up. My heart about stopped. If he got spooked, if he pulled the deal and ran it through some other title company across town, we'd lose him. But Roxanne, bless her, she'd been doing this 25 years because I taught her. And she fed him just enough soothing nonsense about routine verification to keep him calm and keep him coming. The trap was set. The detective was ready. The lawyer was ready. Roxanne was ready. And I was ready, even if every bone in my body still ached and some small, foolish corner of heart was still praying there'd been some mistake, that my babies couldn't really do this to me. But there wasn't any mistake. I knew that. I'd read the file. All that was left now was Friday. The night before the closing was the longest night of my whole life, and I've had some long ones. Pearl made us a real supper, pot roast and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal that's supposed to make you feel like a person again. But I just pushed mine around the plate. After she went to bed, I sat up in her spare room with the lamp on low, my hip aching the way it always ached worst at night, and I let myself do the thing I'd been holding off all week. I let myself remember. I thought about Garrett when he was 7 years old. That summer, Jerry built the treehouse out back in the big oak, and Garrett was his little shadow the whole time, handing him nails one at a time, wearing Jerry's old work gloves that swallowed his arms clear up to the elbow. They were out there every evening till the light gave out. And when it was finally done, Garrett wouldn't sleep in his own bed for a week. He hauled his sleeping bag up into that treehouse and stayed out there, proud as a king, hollering down to me to bring him a flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich. I used to stand at the kitchen window and watch the little square of light up in that tree and think, that's my boy. That's the best thing I ever made. Where did that little boy go? I have asked myself that question 1,000 times since, and I still don't have an answer. How does the child who slept in a treehouse his daddy built grow into a man who'd forge his mama's name to sell that same house out from under her? I don't know. I truly don't. I don't think the not knowing will ever stop hurting. And Corinne. Lord, I thought about Corinne in the 4th grade the year of the school play. She had one line. One. She was a talking tree or some such thing, and she practiced that one line for about 3 weeks straight until the rest of us were ready to lose our minds. And then opening night, she got up on that stage, looked out at all those faces, and froze stiff. Just stood there white as a sheet, eyes welling up. So you know what I did. I scooted right up to the front row where she could see me, and I mouthed the words to her, the whole line real slow, and I gave her a little nod like, you got this, baby. I'm right here. And she found it. She got it out, clear as a bell, and afterward she ran straight into my arms and said, Mama, I saw you. I knew you'd be there. I knew you'd be there. I always was. That's the part that hollows me out. 45 years I always was. And here she'd gone and helped set a trap for the one person who never once let her down. I sat in Pearl's spare room and I grieved those 2 children like they'd died, because in a way they had. The people on that escrow file weren't the kids I raised. I didn't know who they were anymore. Around 9 o'clock, my phone lit up and it was Reed. I'd been dreading and needing this call in equal measure because I hadn't told my baby yet. I hadn't been able to make myself say the words out loud to him. But he must have heard something in my texts all week, because the first thing out of his mouth was, Mom, something's wrong. I can hear it. Don't tell me you're fine. So I told him all of it. The deed, the cash sale, the HELOC, Corinne's name on the file, the closing the next afternoon. I got about halfway through before my voice broke, and that boy just stayed quiet and let me cry, 3 states away the way he always could. When I finished, there was this long silence. And then Reed said, in a voice I didn't quite recognize, real low and careful, Mom. A few months back, Garrett called me. He asked me to talk to you, to get in your ear about selling the house, moving you into something smaller. He was pushing real hard, and it didn't sit right with me. The way he kept circling back to it, the money stuff underneath. I told him no, I wasn't going to pressure my own mother out of her home. We got into it pretty good. And then he kind of backed off, and I figured it was just Garrett being Garrett. But Mom, I never forgot it, stuck in my craw. I've still got the messages. I didn't fully understand right then what he was telling me. I was too wrung out to put it together. I just said, "Oh, honey, why didn't you say something?" And he said, "Because I didn't have anything but a bad feeling, Mom." He never said the word forge. He never said the word steal. "It was just my brother leaning on me to lean on you. And that's not a crime. That's just family being pushy. I had nothing to take to you that wouldn't have sounded like I was stirring up trouble between everybody. So I sat on it. And I have been sick about it ever since. Hold on to that the same way I told you to hold on to that phone call, because my baby boy had been carrying something for months that he didn't even know the weight of yet." Then Reed said the thing that put me back together. He said, "I'm flying out. I land tomorrow morning. I'll come straight to the title office." And I said, "Reed, no, baby. You can't afford a last-minute flight. I know what those cost. I know money's tight." And he just laughed, this tired little laugh, and he said, "Mom, you're my mother. There is no version of this where I'm sitting in Denver tomorrow while you walk into that room alone. I'll eat ramen for a month. I don't care. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because his brother and sister were about to steal $700,000. And here was Reed, who scrapes by pulling double shifts in an ambulance, who really did have to choose between a plane ticket and his grocery money, not even hesitating. People always say it's easy to do the right thing when you've got money. Reed proved that's a lie. The two of my children who had every advantage chose to rob me, and the one who had the least gave up what little he had just to stand beside me. Money never had a thing to do with character, not in my family, maybe not in anybody's. After we hung up, I sat there a long while in the lamplight. I felt steadier somehow. Not happy, Lord, no, there wasn't going to be anything happy about the next day, but steady. I went over the plan one more time in my head, the way I used to go over a tricky closing the night before. 2 o'clock, Sutter Pioneer. Detective Coletti in plain clothes waiting. Lorraine with the quiet title action ready to file. Roxanne working the inside, keeping it all looking normal right up until it wasn't. Reed landing in the morning, coming straight to the office. And me walking through that door on my walker to look my own children in the eye. I turned off the lamp. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't scared anymore. Somewhere in that long, dark night, the grief had hardened into something I could stand on. Tomorrow, my babies were going to find out exactly who their mother was. Friday came gray and cold, the kind of March morning where the sky can't decide whether to rain on you or just sulk. Pearl helped me get dressed. I picked out my good blue blouse, the one I saved for church and funerals, and I put on the little pearl earrings Jerry gave me on our 30th anniversary. I figured if I was going to walk in there and face down my own children, I was going to do it looking like somebody's mother, not like some broken down old woman they could feel sorry for. Pearl looked at me in the mirror and she said, "You sure you're up for this, Maeve?" And I said, "Pearl, I have been up for this for 47 years. I just didn't know it till now." Reed's flight landed a little after 11. He called me from the rental car lot, and just hearing my baby's voice on solid ground, in the same state as me, put about 10 pounds of strength back in my spine. He said, "I'm coming straight there, Mom. I'll meet you in the parking lot. Don't you dare go in without me." I told him I wouldn't dream of it. Pearl drove me over to Sutter Pioneer, and we got there at 1:30, a good half hour early, the way I always taught my people to be. I had Pearl park around the side, away from the front windows, because I didn't want Garrett pulling in and spotting me before it was time. Detective Coletti's car was already there, an unmarked gray sedan tucked in at the far end of the lot, and I could just make out the shape of him sitting behind the wheel, patient as a stone. Lorraine pulled in a few minutes later with a briefcase full of the documents that were going to blow this whole thing sky high. And then Reed came wheeling in, and that boy was out of the car before it had hardly stopped, and he wrapped me up so careful, mindful of my hip, and he just held me there in the parking lot for a long minute and said into my hair, "I've got you, Mom. Whatever happens in there, I've got you." I'll tell you, walking up to that building was a strange thing. 31 years I'd walked through those doors. I knew the weight of them, the little chime the front sensor made, the smell of the carpet, and the burnt coffee in the break room. I knew which fluorescent light in the lobby flickered. I'd sat in that conference room and closed hundreds of deals, handed hundreds of people the keys to the biggest purchase of their lives, watched young couples cry happy tears and old folks downsize with a sigh. And now I was walking into that same room to catch my children robbing me. The irony of it sat in my chest like a stone. Roxanne met us in the lobby. She didn't make a fuss, just gave my hand a squeeze real quick, and she said, "Lo, they're already in there. Both of them. The buyer, too. They think it's just running a few minutes behind. I've got the file on hold. Nothing's moving. You're safe." And then she looked me dead in the eye and she said, "You taught me to trust my gut, Maeve. This is the proudest I've ever been that I listened to you. I damn near lost it right there in the lobby, but I held it together. There'd be time for crying later. Lord knows there'd be time for that." The plan was simple. Coletti would slip in first and post up off to the side, plain as any other fella waiting on paperwork, and get the lay of the room. Then, after a couple minutes, Reed and I would go in, Lorraine right behind us. I'd give my children one chance to look me in the eye and tell the truth, and when they didn't, the floor was going to come out from under them. Coletti went in. We gave it 2 minutes by Reed's watch, the longest 2 minutes of my life. And then my baby boy held the door, and I pushed my walker through it, into that conference room I knew better than my own kitchen. There they were, my children. Garrett was sitting at the head of the long table like he owned the place, leaned back in the chair, comfortable, a pen already in his hand, 47 years old, and still that same cocky tilt to his chin he'd had since he was a teenager. Corinne was beside him, smalls or somehow, hunched, picking at the cuff of her sweater the way she's done when she's nervous since she was a little girl. Across from them sat a heavyset man in a golf shirt with a folder in front of him, the buyer, Dale Hutchins, looking exactly like a fella who thinks he's about to score the deal of the decade. And there was a closing agent at the end of the table, one of Roxanne's juniors, who'd been quietly clued in just enough to keep her seat and her mouth shut. The second that door opened and they saw me, the whole room changed. Corinne saw me first. The blood just drained right out of her face. She made a sound, this little broken O, and her hand flew up to her mouth. And Garrett, my Garrett, he turned and looked at me standing there on my walker in my good blue blouse. And for about half a second, I watched pure naked panic flash across my son's face before he slammed the door on it. He shot up out of that chair. "Mom," he said. "Mom, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in rehab." And I just stood there in the doorway and I let the quiet do the work for a moment, the way I'd learned to do in 31 years of hard conversations. Then I said, real even, surprise. "You could have heard a pin drop on that carpet." Dale Hutchins looked back and forth between us, confused, sensing something had gone sideways, but not knowing what. The junior agent stared at her hands, and my two oldest children sat frozen, caught, while their mother stood in the doorway they never expected her to walk through. Garrett recovered first, because Garrett always recovers first. He put on this big concerned face, and he came around the table toward me, hands out, all warmth, and he said, "Mom, you shouldn't be up. You're going to hurt yourself. Come on, let's get you sat down. Listen, I know how this looks, but I promise you, everything we're doing here is for you. You fell, Mom. You broke your hip. You can't be climbing those stairs anymore. You can't be rattling around that big house all by yourself. We're getting you somewhere safe, somewhere they can look after you. We were going to surprise you with it, a nice place, all taken care of. This is us looking out for you." And I'll be honest, there was a time before all this when those words might have worked on me. They were good words, warm words, practiced words. But I wasn't his mother right then. I was an escrow officer who'd been reading exactly this kind of performance for 3 decades, and I'd already seen behind the curtain. So I looked at my son and I said, Garrett, stop. Just stop talking and listen to me, because I'm only going to say this once." And then I laid it out. Cold and clean, the way I'd laid it out for Coletti, except this time I was looking my own boy in the eye while I did it. I said, "I closed 4,000 of these deals, Garrett. 4,000. I have read more grant deeds than you have read books in your entire life. So don't you dare stand in front of me and act like I don't know exactly what I'm looking at. There is a grant deed recorded with Sacramento County, dated last week, transferring my house out of my name and into yours. I never signed it. You forged my name on it. You got it notarized. and you recorded it down at the county, which is a felony, son. It's got a number, Penal Code 115. And then you turned around and listed my $700,000 home for $560, a fire sale price, to this poor man here who has no idea he's about to buy a house, with a forged deed sitting under it because you needed it to close fast and quiet before I ever got home. Dale Hutchins's mouth dropped open. He half rose out of his chair. What? He said. What did she just say? But I wasn't done. I turned back to Garrett and I said, and that's not even the worst of it, is it? Because 8 months ago, after your daddy died and you so kindly offered to handle all my paperwork, you forged my name on a home equity line of credit against my paid-off house. And you've been draining it dry ever since, drip by drip, while you collected my mail so I'd never see a statement. This sale was never about getting me into some nice, safe place, Garrett. This was you covering your tracks. You bled my house half to death, and then you tried to sell off the corpse before I could find the body. The room had gone dead silent. Corinne was crying now, quiet, her shoulders shaking. And Garrett, I watched my son's whole face change, watched the warm, concerned mask slide right off it, and underneath there wasn't shame. There wasn't sorrow. There was just cold, hard anger that he'd been caught. And then he played his last card. He reached into his own folder on the table and he pulled out a piece of paper and he held it up like it was a winning lottery ticket. And his voice went hard and loud. Mom, you're confused, he said. You're not well. You've been through a major surgery. You're on pain medication. You don't know what you're saying. I have your written authorization right here. You signed it. You gave me permission to handle the sale of the house. It's right here with your signature on it. So before you go throwing words like forgery around in front of all these people, you might want to remember that you agreed to this. He waved that forged authorization letter in the air, and for one ugly second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath because he sounded so sure, so certain, the way a good liar always does. Dale Hutchins looked at me uncertain, like maybe, just maybe, this was all some confused old woman's mix-up after all. I felt the ground tilt, because I knew that signature on that letter was a forgery, same as the deed, but proving it right there, in that room, in that moment, that was going to be my word against his. And my son was betting that an old woman fresh out of surgery wouldn't be able to make it stick. That's when my baby boy stepped forward. Reed had been standing quiet beside me that whole time, letting me have my say. But now he took a step toward that table and he pulled out his phone and he said in a voice so steady and so cold, I almost didn't recognize my own gentle son. Put the paper down, Garrett, because I think the detective standing right behind you is going to be a lot more interested in what's on my phone. Garrett's head whipped around, and that's when the man in the corner, the one nobody had paid any mind to, stepped forward and held up a badge. Detective Ray Coletti, he said. Financial crimes. And I'd suggest everybody stay right where they are. But Reed wasn't finished, and what he said next is the thing that brought the whole house of cards crashing down. He held up that phone and he said, 3 months ago, Garrett called me. He wanted me to work on Mom, to push her into selling the house and moving out. And when I told him no, he got real specific about why he needed the money and how if Mom wouldn't go along willingly, there were, and these are your exact words, brother, other ways to get it done. I've got the texts, I've got a voicemail. 3 months ago, long before she ever fell. You didn't decide to do this because she broke her hip and needed help. You'd already decided. The hip just gave you your opening. I want you to understand what that meant, standing in that room. My whole case, up to that second, could have been spun as some terrible misunderstanding, an overstepping son who panicked and made bad choices in a crisis. That's what Garrett was counting on. But Reed had just proven, in front of a detective and a buyer and a closing agent and God, that this was no panic. This was a plan. 3 months in the making, maybe longer. My son hadn't stumbled into stealing from me. He'd been walking toward it for the better part of a year, just waiting on his chance. And here's the part that broke my heart clean in the best way it could be broken. My baby boy, the one who scrapes by in Denver, the one I'd told nothing to, the one I'd half forgotten could even help, had been quietly protecting me for months without even knowing the full shape of what he was protecting me from. He'd held on to those messages on nothing but a bad feeling and a good heart. I had walked into that room thinking I was alone, except for the law and the lawyers. I wasn't. I'd never been alone. Reed had been standing guard the whole time. Garrett looked at the detective and at the phone in his brother's hand, and I watched the last of the fight go out of his face and curdle into something ugly. He said, "This is insane. You're all insane." He turned to Coletti and he said, "Detective, this is a family matter. My mother is elderly and confused. My brother has always been jealous of me. This is a setup." And Coletti, calm as anything, said Mr. Ridgway, "I've got a recorded forged deed, a forged HELOC, a fire sale cash transaction, and now your own brother handing me what sounds like premeditation. This is about as far from a family misunderstanding as I've seen in 20 years. So you can stop talking now or you can keep talking, but either way, this sale is not happening today." He turned to Dale Hutchins, who looked like a man who just found out the car he bought was stolen, which in a manner of speaking it was. Coletti said, "Sir, I'd strongly advise you to call your own attorney. The property you were about to purchase has a forged deed on it. No money has changed hands, and none is going to. You dodged a bullet today." Dale grabbed his folder and his cashier's check and got out of that room so fast he near knocked his chair over, muttering about how he knew the price was too good to be true. And then it was just us, my children, my detective, my lawyer, my boy, and me. That's when Corinne broke. She'd been crying that whole time, but now it just came pouring out of her, the way a dam goes all at once. "Mama," she sobbed, "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, God." And it all came spilling out between the tears, everything, faster than she could hardly get it out. She said Doug had been out of work for months, and they were drowning, the credit cards maxed out, 2 kids and the mortgage, and no way to dig out. She said Garrett came to her, told her he had a way to fix everything for both of them, that the house was just sitting there worth a fortune while Mom was laid up, that I'd be better off in a nice facility anyway, that I'd never know. It'd all be handled before I got home, and we'd just tell her we found a beautiful place. She said she knew deep down it was wrong, but she was so scared and so tired, and Garrett made it sound so easy, so painless, like nobody would really get hurt. And then she said the thing that I think will stay with me till the day I die. She looked at me with her whole face just wrecked, and she said, "We thought you'd never find out, Mama. We thought you'd never have to know. We thought you'd never have to know," as if that made it kinder. As if stealing everything I had was somehow a mercy as long as I died not knowing my own children did it. And through all of it, all of Corinne's weeping and confessing, Garrett never said one word of sorry. Not one. He just stood there with his jaw set and his eyes hard, glaring at his sobbing sister like she was the one who'd betrayed him by cracking. No remorse, no shame, just fury that the plan had failed, and a sister too weak to hold the line. I looked at the two of them, my babies, the treehouse boy, and the little girl who froze on stage, and I felt every one of my 73 years sitting on my shoulders. And there was only one thing left in me to say. I looked right at Garrett, and I asked him the question that was underneath all of it, the only question that ever really mattered. I said, "Garrett, in all of this, in 3 months of planning, in 8 months of bleeding my house dry, in all the times you sat by my hospital bed and held my hand and told me not to worry, did you ever once, one single time, just ask me what I wanted?" He didn't answer me. He couldn't even look at me. And that silence was the loudest thing I ever heard in my life. What happens after a thing like that is not the clean, satisfying ending you see in the movies. There's no music swelling, no credits rolling. What there is mostly is paperwork, months of it, which I suppose is a fitting kind of irony for a woman who spent her whole life pushing paper across a closing table. Detective Coletti took statements from everybody that afternoon, right there at Sutter Pioneer. He took Corinne aside first, and she just kept talking, kept confessing, telling him everything. Like getting it out was the only thing keeping her upright. Garrett, he lawyered up on the spot, wouldn't say another word. Smart move, probably the only smart move he had left, but it told me everything I needed to know about where his head was at. Corinne was drowning in shame. Garrett was just calculating the angles. In the weeks that followed, the picture filled in, and it was uglier than even I had figured. Coletti tracked down the notary, a fella named Donnie Vec, who ran one of those mobile notary outfits, the kind that'll come to your kitchen table for $50. Turned out Donnie hadn't checked a single ID. Garrett had shown up with the deed and some woman, not me, claiming to be me, and Donnie just stamped it and took his fee and asked no questions. Now, I want to be fair, I don't think Donnie set out to be a crook, but a notary's whole job, the entire reason the job exists, is to verify that the person signing is who they say they are. He didn't do it, and his sloppiness was a load-bearing wall in the whole scheme. He lost his commission over it, and he was lucky that's all he lost. Then there was the legal work to untangle my own house, which is its own special kind of nightmare. Lorraine filed what's called a quiet title action. That's the lawsuit you file to officially declare that a forged deed is void and to put the title back where it belongs, clean, in my name. It sounds simple. It is not simple. It took months and hearings and a stack of documents about a foot high. And the HELOC, that was a whole battle, because there was a real bank on the other end of it that had loaned out real money in good faith against my house, and they did not just want to walk away from it. Lorraine had to fight to prove the signature was forged, to show I'd never seen a dime of that money, to get the lien lifted off my property. We got it done. But I'll tell you, it was a long, exhausting fight, and there were nights I wondered if I'd ever get my own house back free and clear, the house I'd already paid for once with 40 years of my life. The district attorney charged Garrett hard, and I didn't lift a finger to stop them. Filing a forged instrument under Penal Code 115, forgery, and elder financial abuse, which in California is its own serious charge when you steal from somebody over 65, and it carries real weight. With the forged deed, the forged HELOC, the months of premeditation that reads messages laid bare, and Corinne's full confession, the case against my son was about as airtight as they come. His lawyer made some noise about a trial, but everybody in that room knew how it would go. In the end, Garrett took a plea, because the alternative was rolling the dice in front of a jury with all of that stacked against him, and even Garrett wasn't fool enough to do that. He got prison time, real time, behind real bars, not the slap on the wrist that white-collar crooks so often skate away with, and a felony record that's going to follow him the rest of his days. When the judge read it out, I watched my son's face, and there still wasn't any remorse there. Just resentment. Just a man who blamed everybody but himself for sitting where he sat. I think that was the hardest part of the whole thing, harder even than the betrayal. It's one thing to have a child do a terrible thing. It's another to look at him afterward and see that given the chance, he'd do it again. Corinne was a different story, and the law saw it different too. She'd come in late. She'd been pulled in by her brother when she was desperate and scared, and the second the walls came down, she told the whole truth and never stopped telling it. She cooperated with the prosecution completely. She agreed to testify against Garrett if it came to that. So the DA offered her a deal that reflected all of that: probation, restitution, a long stretch of community service, and the felony hanging over her head if she put one toe out of line. No prison. The system for once got the nuance right. It came down hard on the one who planned it and showed mercy to the one who broke. And the restitution, let me be plain about this, because folks get it twisted. The money they were ordered to pay me back wasn't some big windfall for my pain and suffering. The criminal court doesn't work that way, and anybody who tells you different has been watching too much television. Restitution covers your actual provable losses. So it was the tens of thousands Garrett had bled out of that HELOC. It was my legal fees, the cost of the quiet title action, the cost of cleaning up the mess. Real dollars for real damage. If I'd wanted to chase him for the heartbreak, for the betrayal, for what it does to a woman to learn her children planned her robbery from a hospital bed, that would have been a separate lawsuit entirely, a civil one, and I never filed it. What would have been the point? You can't put a dollar figure on a thing like that, and even if you could, Garrett didn't have it. You can't squeeze blood from a stone, and you can't get back trust by garnishing somebody's wages. Now here's the part I didn't see coming. The part that knocked the wind clean out of me, months later, sitting in Lorraine's office, going over the case file. You remember that phone call? The anonymous one. The one I told you to hold on to, way back at the beginning. The call that came into Sutter Pioneer, no name, just a voice saying somebody ought to take a real close look at the paperwork on Larkspur Lane before it closed. The call that nagged at Roxanne enough to make her pull the file, which is the only reason any of this got caught in time. Without that call, Roxanne might not have looked twice until it was too late. That one anonymous tip is the thread that unraveled the whole thing. It was Corinne. I found it in the phone records the investigators had pulled. A call to the title company's main line from a number I didn't recognize at first until Lorraine matched it to a prepaid cell, a burner, and then we traced it and it led back to my daughter. 3 days before Roxanne ever called me, Corinne had gone out and bought a cheap prepaid phone, and she'd called the title company anonymously, and she'd tried to throw a wrench in the very scheme she was helping carry out. And then she'd gotten scared and hung up and gone right back to playing her part because she didn't have the courage to do the one brave thing all the way, to call me or call the police or just stand up to her brother and say no. I sat in Lorraine's office and I cried. But it was a different kind of crying than I'd done in months. Because all that time I'd carried this picture of Corinne as just the weaker of the two, the one who went along. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that some piece of my daughter, some scared, cornered, guilt-eaten piece of her, had been trying to save me even while the rest of her was helping ruin me. She couldn't do it clean. She couldn't do it brave, but she tried. In her own broken, half-hearted, frightened way, she tried to undo it. And that one cowardly little phone call from a burner phone is the only reason I still have my house. It didn't make what she did okay, Lord no. But it told me she wasn't gone the way Garrett was gone. There was still something in there worth grieving for, and maybe someday something worth forgiving. I live in my house. That's the first thing I want you to know after all of it. I won. I kept the house Jerry built that porch on. The title's clean, back in my name, free and clear, where it belongs. But I'll be honest with you the way I've tried to be honest with you this whole time. It doesn't feel like winning. I sat across a courtroom from 2 of my 3 children and watched them answer for trying to rob their own mother. There's no version of that where anybody wins. I kept the house and I lost the family, and I knew sitting in that courtroom that I'd lost it months before, the day they decided to forge my name. I just hadn't gotten the news yet. Reed stayed out for 2 weeks after the closing, sleeping on Pearl's couch, driving me to hearings, sitting beside me through every awful meeting. My baby boy who ate ramen for a month so he could be in that room. He calls me twice a week still, same as always, and now I make sure he knows every single time what it meant that he was the one who stood up. He keeps trying to tell me he should have said something sooner about Garrett's calls, about the bad feeling. I keep telling him there was nothing to say. He acted on a feeling and a good heart, and that feeling is the reason the truth came out at all. The boy who had the least gave the most. I'll spend whatever years I've got left making sure he knows I know that. Garrett has never reached out, not once. From the day they let him out of that courtroom, nothing. No letter, no message, no word passed through anybody. I don't expect there will be. My son made his choice, and the man I saw in that courtroom, the one with the hard eyes and no remorse, that man isn't coming to me with an apology. I've made my peace with it, as much as a mother can ever make peace with losing a living child. I light a candle for the little boy in the treehouse sometimes. But the man I had to let him go. Corinne wrote me a letter about 6 months after the sentencing. A long one in her own hand, and I could see the places where the ink ran, where she'd cried onto the page. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She just told me she knew what she'd done, and that she'd understand if I never wanted to lay eyes on her again, and that she was sorry, more sorry than a letter could ever hold. And she asked, real gentle, not for herself, but whether maybe someday I might want to see Junie and Wyatt, her kids, my grandbabies, who didn't do a thing wrong and who missed their grandma. I sat with that letter a long time, and here's where I landed, and I know not everybody will agree with me, and that's all right. I wrote her back. I told her I wasn't ready, that the wound was still too fresh, that I couldn't just open the door and pretend, but I didn't slam it shut either, because of that burner phone, because some frightened piece of my daughter had tried to save me when her brother never would have, because she broke, and then she tried to undo the breaking, and because she's the mother of two children who still deserve their grandmother. I told her the door wasn't open yet, but I didn't tell her it was locked. I left it the smallest crack, the way you leave a porch light on for somebody you're not sure is coming home, but you can't quite bring yourself to leave them in the dark. That's where it sits to this day, a cracked door. Maybe someday it opens, maybe it doesn't. But I couldn't be the one to nail it shut, not when she'd given me one good reason, one small, brave, courtly reason to keep the light on. There was one more thing I had to do, and I did it on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week I'd fallen down those stairs a lifetime before. I drove myself down to Sutter Pioneer, walking now, no walker, just a cane and a stubborn limp the hip surgeon says I'll have forever. And Roxanne met me, and the two of us sat down together at that same long conference table where it all came to a head, and we recorded a clean deed. My name. Just my name, the way it should be, free and clear. 31 years I spent in that building making sure other people's homes ended up legally, truly theirs. And the very last document I ever signed in that office was the one that put my own home back in my own hands, witnessed by the girl I trained a quarter century ago, who saved my life by remembering everything I taught her. We closed that circle together, and when it was done, Roxanne hugged me, and we both cried, and it was the good kind this time, the kind that means it's over. I sit on Jerry's porch every morning, same as always, in the chair he built, in the house we paid for twice. And I talk to him, and some mornings I still swear he answers. I tell him about the grandbabies I hope to see again someday. I tell him I kept the house. I tell him I'm sorry about the boys, about all of it. And I tell him that I did the hard thing, the right thing, even when it was our own children on the other side of it. Because that's what he'd have wanted, and that's who I had to be. This is still my house. This is still my life. And after everything, that turned out to be enough. Lo xiêm nhiệm kui dok chump quang unfood people ask if I'd do it again. Turn in my own son, sit in that courtroom and watch them lead him away. I would. Not because I stopped loving him, but because love was never what was in danger. What they tried to take wasn't a house. It was my right to decide how my own life ends, who walks me to the door, and when. You spend your whole life giving your children roots, telling yourself roots hold. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the people you'd give your life for are the ones you have to stand against. I forgave the daughter who broke and tried to undo it. I could not forgive the son who never looked back. And at 73, I learned that dignity isn't handed to you, not even by your own blood. You hold on to it yourself, or you lose it. This is still my house. This is still my life. And that is enough.